Hello, my name is Tia, also known as Costume Fiend because I'm both evil and excessively fond of dressing up. I'm nerdy about a lot of things, and for that reason, there are some topics I know I probably won't approach if I want to stick to making short and digestible videos. That being said, I decided to challenge myself a little bit and talk about Aphrodite. This constitutes as a challenge because I could honestly talk about a lot of things related to Greek mythology in general, but also because over the last few years I've definitely done some reading up on Aphrodite specifically. When talking about a goddess, there are many angles that can be approached. Before I do, though, here's my usual disclaimer: I'm just an American nerd who loves stories and wouldn't consider myself strongly religious. That being said, I do like to keep in mind that when dealing with what we call myth, we're dealing with something people alive today believe in, and in the case of Aphrodite, from a culture that I'm not really a part of. So all my thoughts should be considered with that in mind. With that out of the way, I think I want to start by bringing up where my interest came from. Like I said, I learned about Greek mythology for the first time in third grade and checked out plenty of the books in the kids section that my library had to offer. I'd say I was super into Eros and Psyche as far as mythological couples go, and then I fell down the Hades and Persephone rabbit hole before arriving at appreciating the dynamic between Aphrodite and Ares. In general, I'd say growing up and life happening also played a part in that shift in focus. As a kid, it was, of course, easy to put Aphrodite in a very specific, shallow, girly girl box, which I didn't personally want to be confined to. Most of the children's books dedicated one or two pages to the main figures, and the Aphrodite sections usually covered like the net incident and the Judgment of Paris debacle. In any case, not to psychoanalyze myself, but I think in part because of my not like other girls phase and because of low confidence, the ideas of beauty and love were in fact kind of shallow to me. Then I got older and realized things like makeup could be whatever the hell I wanted them to be, and embraced my love of the romance novel, and decided that despite the fact that those concepts could be twisted in a pro consumeristic and capitalist way, they are also deeply personal. And even when I felt really low and when I sometimes deal with depression, there's still a lot of things that I do love, despite not always up to feeling engaged with them. And there's still a lot of beautiful things in the world, even when I'm not in the mood to see it. So even though I'm not religious and try not to get too sappy in public, I do think that the concepts that Aphrodite largely stands for are the concepts I'd like to put out there in my real life, if that makes any sense. Especially since I don't think love is purely about romance, although again, it's a genre I do like, nor do I think it's passive. If there weren't people that I loved or things that I loved doing much, it'd be much harder for me to justify hanging around this planet, if you know what I mean. And beauty as a concept is obviously loaded in a society that enforces certain standards and makes money off of people's insecurities. But kind of like with love, it doesn't have to be corporate. It can be about the fun I have putting makeup on and then taking it off and still liking the face I see, or being able to unlearn society standards and being able to see the beauty in pretty much anybody's face. Thinking about Aphrodite like that as a guideline and an inspiration is probably what made me lean towards her. On top of revisiting some of the books from my childhood, I've also read up on her using the website theoi.com. Kind of never said that out loud before, so I don't know if I pronounced that correctly, but I'll spell it out and put a link to it. And recently read both Venus and Aphrodite: History of a Goddess by Bettany Hughes, and Aphrodite Encountering the Goddess of Love and Beauty and Initiation by Isisanya Moon. Hope I said that correctly too. Bettany Hughes' book kind of fed the nerd in me who thinks knowing about the history of Aphrodite is just as deep and important as focusing on the spiritual side. But like I said, since I'm not extremely religious myself, seeing Aphrodite through the eyes of a devotee kind of also made for a good read. This obviously doesn't make me an expert, but I'm certainly open to reading more, and given that I don't go for nonfiction often, that's kind of saying something. Side note, this is for neurodivergent reasons, mostly because I do enjoy learning things when my head's in the right place. It's just not always easy for me to concentrate, and nonfiction can sometimes be written in a way that just doesn't work for my brain. But anyway, in the spirit of not rambling on for a long time, I think I'll just cover two more points specifically. The first point, despite the fact that the focus of this was on Aphrodite and I've done more research on her specifically, I brought up her relationship with Ares earlier for a reason. That reason being that the combination of the two of them and what they could represent is also kind of appealing to me. They're disliked by many separately and together, both in the mythology itself and outside of it. But to be honest, I think the reason for that is multifaceted, and I'll just keep it simple and say that the dislike from other people doesn't really matter much to me. I've also written a short thing with regards to the whole net incidents because looking at that story through fresh eyes has kind of made me realize how weird it is that the modern interpretation of it is boiled down to like the nerd brother and the jock brother fighting over the homecoming queen. I wrote about why it bugged me and why I think that shallow view of the story, among other things, says a lot about how we view women versus men who might have disadvantages but still use the patriarchy to their advantage. There's really no Greek god that's squeaky clean and unproblematic based off of any of the stories that I've read, so I do feel like it's kind of useless to play the whole who's morally better game. Plus, to allow myself to be a little bit shallow for a moment, I kind of just think aesthetically Aphrodite and Ares are a cute couple, and I certainly enjoy the way I draw them and have seen other people draw and interpret them over the years. Anyway, moving on to my second and last point. Despite not always being the most interesting figure to me, even when I was a child, I tended to enjoy female characters that were more chill or sophisticated. Maybe this was also a smidge of the nerd diversions popping in and being half Barbadian, but I take a character design and personality that actually feels like a grown woman over a more childish character any day. And even though she can be as petty and spiteful as anyone else on the Pantheon, Aphrodite is pretty much always depicted as an adult woman. Hell, she was born a grown up, a concept I'm sure black women and older sisters such as myself can relate to. Don't know if that has anything actually to do with the interest, but it's just an interesting thing to think about. I respect the maturity and the visual that the epitome of beauty is not like a teenager, especially given how so many weirdos out there these days are going on about teenage fertility and teenage, like, young girls being the peak of everything. I like Aphrodite as a grown woman in my mind. In closing, I think I did pretty good. Like I said, I could go on way longer about any one of the above points. Again, I wrote a whole thing about the net incident and junk, but I'm going to keep this the way that it is. If I can remember, I'll try to put links to the books I read and to that not really an essay, but kind of an essay thing that I wrote. Other than that, leave a like if you liked, subscribe if you want more nerdy rambling, and as always, have a good one.